Hey guys, I'm gonna do a video today and I want to talk about the Camp of the Saints. And this is going to come on the heels of Madeline at Leaving Babylon's amazing video she did last week, speaking on this topic, showing a lot of old maps and showing antique maps that showed the land of Jesus. And when she started presenting this, it took me back to my childhood where I remember a map just like this, very similar to this, on my dad's office wall. And I remember staring at it for hours at a time. I'd take it off the wall and look at it. I'd look at all the countries that were represented. I'd look at every name, every city. I would wonder, one, why is California an island? But two, why does it show in the northwest part of North America that it was parts as yet unknown? And you can see here, parts as yet unknown. And in the upper part of it, part of the northern unknown. And so I wondered why it was presented like this. And so when she started talking about this topic, suddenly all those questions that I had answers for her. And as soon as she started showing her presentation, it immediately rang of truth. And so hopefully I will be able to build upon her research. We're going to look at a lot of old maps and we're going to talk about the Camp of the Saints and why these maps look like that during the 15, 16, 17 into the 1800s. Madeline showed a map like this of China, an antique map of China. You can see part of Tartary in the west, part of America in the east, and in between you can see the Anian Strait. And you can see here a picture of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. Why is that presented where it is on this antique map? And that map got me thinking about research that I did a few years ago, looking at time manipulation and how our chronology has been changed. And I looked at a lot of maps looking at the dates of those and how they were represented. I wasn't so much looking at the land itself and how land might have been hidden, like Madeline has done on hers, and as we're going to look at today. But I do remember from that research a map like this that I looked at, and you can see there the Great Wall of China divided China at that time from Tartary. And you can see the Strait of Anian in the upper right hand corner across from America. But you can see right on the eastern northern coast of Tartary a city called Tinduk. And it says a kingdom where Christians reigned in the years I-290. And you can also see Ung, which some call Gog, and right next to it to the left under Tartar, you can see Magog. And so after Madeline's presentation about the Camp of the Saints and about this area, suddenly it made sense why there was a Christian kingdom in the northeast part of Tartary that Christians reigned from at that time. So let's begin looking at a lot of maps. And these are going to go from old to newer. This one being roughly in the late 1500s or early 1600s. And you can see here, Terra de Iesso, our land of Jesus. And you can see below it, the Sea of Jesus. You can see Japan on the bottom left and Tartary in the upper left, part of Tartary of Asia. And you can see on the other side, you can see California. You can see the border of the United States. And you can see the Strait of Anian right there. But this shows two straits, not one, with a central land mass, the land of Jesus. Between the eastern border of the land of Jesus in California is the Anian Strait. The western border of the land of Jesus from Asia is the Strait of Vries. So now we have two straits. And go and watch Madeline's video about the confusion between those straits and how she hypothesizes about it, because I think that a lot of her thoughts make a lot of sense. I'm going to show some other things during this that we can speculate about, but it starts with the international dateline being at this point. And the international dateline was a line that was developed during the Little Season, which passes through the Pacific Ocean, and it's a vertical line that runs from one pole to the other. And you can see here it was established in 1884. And it goes right through what we now know as the Bering Strait. Or is it the Strait of Anian? Or is it the Strait of De Vries? But you can see here that if you cross the international dateline from Russia to the United States, Alaska, you go back in time by a day. And if you go from United States to Russia, you go forward by a day. But it's not 24 hours, it's 21 hours. So if you went from Russia to Alaska and crossed the international dateline, if it was 1 a.m. on a Monday in Russia, it would be 4 a.m. on a Sunday in the United States. Why is it 21 hours and not 24 hours? Is there land between Russia and Alaska that they're hiding? And is it 3 time zones worth of land? You can see here, 3 time zones would be as big as most of the United States, from the Rocky Mountains to the eastern coast. And Madeline hypothesized that there could literally be 3 hours of land, 3 time zones of land in that area. And we see a lot of maps of that very thing. And let's look at this old map. For instance, you can see, I can't flip it, but if you can turn your head upside down, you can read this at the top, the land of Jesus. It's also the unknown land above it. And you can see the state of California as an island. You can see between the border of the land of Jesus and California, you can see the Strait of Anian. And on the other border near Russia, which on this map is Tartary, you can see the Strait of De Vries. And if you look at it and look at the United States from the Rocky Mountains to the eastern coast and put that amount to scale across the land of Jesus, it does look like it's about 3 hours. Beautiful situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. And in Micah 5:7, and the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people as a dew from the Lord, as the showers upon the grass, that tarrieth not for man, nor waiteth for the sons of men. And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who if he go through, both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. So we know that Jerusalem is in the midst of the world. And heavenly Jerusalem, I believe, is above in the North Pole, in the center of our realm. The camp of the saints possibly being below it. And Micah 5, 7, and 8 is speaking of millennial. These are millennial kingdom verses. And specifically, it shows that the land of Jacob, the remnant of Jacob, at that time would be in the midst of the nations. And that Mount Zion is situated in the north, on the sides of the north. So with that thought, let's continue looking at these old maps. And we'll look at this one. Again, these are very old maps in the 1600s. And in the upper northwest part, you can see the land of Jesus. You see it over and over with the Strait of Anion between California and the land of Jesus, and you see Tartary and the land of Jesus being separated by the Strait of Vries. Here's another map, again showing California as an island, and you can see Terra de Iesso, land of Jesus. This says was discovered in 1643, but you can see the Strait of Anion right there. California is an island, the Strait of De Vries, the eastern coast of Tartary. It shows it this way over and over again in antique maps of the 1600s. Here's another map in that relatively same time frame. This is flipped, so it is backwards of how we think of it, with California as an island being here on the left side, with the land of Jesus between it and Tartary. And you can see between Tartary and the land of Jesus is the Strait of Vries. You see it over and over and over again. People knew this. People at that time knew there was a land in the north, the land that Jesus resided over. That's where he was. That's where his camp was. That's where his congregation was. That's where saints were. And they went throughout the world spreading the gospel and building infrastructure after the cataclysmic events of the trumpet and vial judgments, which made the four quarters of the earth. We'll continue to look at some more maps, and this one's interesting. You can see here, this is looking at it from a polar map, and in this area here, you can see where the land of Jesus was now says camp land. And you can see Anion and the Strait of Anion. You can see California as an island again, and you can see Japan and Tartary down here at the bottom of the map. But again, if you can turn your head sideways, this says camp land, or land of the camp. Another map here, again in the 1600s, showing the Strait of Anion, California is an island, the land of Jesus, and you can see Cuvira here, and this was also known as a city of riches, a city of gold. and it generally was looked at in the northern part of our world at that time. A city of gold, a city of riches. Here's another map, and there are so many of these, and they all show the same thing. The land of Jesus, the Strait of Anian, California as an island. Between California and United States proper, you see the Red Sea, which is very interesting also. Another map showing the same thing. Part of Asia, the Strait of Vries, with a landmass between it, the land of Jesus, the Sea of Jesus below it, which is the Pacific Ocean, as Madeline made to pacify us, to make peace, and who is the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ. But you can see here again, California is an island, the Red Sea in between it and the United States proper, and the Strait of Anian between the coast of California and the land of Jesus. And one more from that time period. And you can see again, California is an island, but now, as it's getting later in the early 1700s, you begin to see pictorials in this area. And as we'll see, suddenly this region became unknown. But at that time, it was still showing a hint of that's blurry, but it says the land of the camp, Terra de Campagny, and the Strait of De Vries between it and Tartary. So now as we go forward, suddenly we begin seeing the maps, the antique maps, later in the 1700s, and California's not an island anymore. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, you don't see what's called the land of Jesus. You basically see California connected together with what we would now know as Alaska, where Anian is. And you can still see on the eastern part in the top left, Asia Pars, or part of Asia. And you can see that there's now one strait between two continents, and not two. And the land of Jesus is missing from this map. You can also see Quivira again on this map in that area. But in other maps during that same time, you see a land of Jesus again, but it begins to be called an unrecognized or unknown region, regio incognita. And you can see that there is a Strait of Anian there by the island of California, and the Strait of De Vries between this unknown region, which below it is still listed as the land of Jesus and the Sea of Jesus below it, with the Strait of De Vries between it and Tartary. And this brings me back to my dad's map that he had on his office wall, because once you start getting into the mid and late 1700s, then the land of Jesus is wiped from the maps. and it begins to be known simply as unknown regions of land, parts unknown, as you can see here. You can see that they still show at this time California as an island. You can still see the Strait of Anian, but here you see simply parts unknown. And now, in the upper left-hand corner of these maps, you begin seeing these advertisements and these listings there instead of actual land. Why is that? You can see it here again in this map of North America. In the upper left-hand corner, unknown land. Terra Iesso Incognito, which basically means land that is, eso to be or being. And so this is land that's there, it's present, but it's unknown what it is. And you can see again California as an island and the Strait of Anian. But you do not see the coast of Tartary shown anymore, and you do not see the Strait of De Vries anymore. And you continue looking at these maps as we go well into the 1700s. Some still show California as an island, but you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, Terra Iesso Incognito, land that's known, land that is there but is unknown. So suddenly this known land, this land of Jesus, is now in the late 1700s unknown. And then you begin to see maps like this as we go forward. This is a polar map, but it shows Arctic land. So it shows that land's there, and you can see Greenland is attached to this Arctic land. But the land of Jesus is now completely wiped out. It's basically just being erased from these maps, as you can see here. And this also begins to show California no longer as an island. So in the late 1700s, they begin to, one, either hide this land that's between what we now know as Alaska and Russia, or there was something that occurred at that time to change the landscape where it's no longer known what that land is, how big is it, and also there were effects as far south as the west coast of the United States, where California is no longer an island anymore, but is connected to the United States proper. So are they hiding something that's there with these maps, or did something occur during that time to change the landscape? You can see here, as we go forward in the late 1700s, again, California is no longer an island, and you can see that these parts are entirely unknown. So this map says where in the 1600s, they knew exactly what this was. It was the land of Jesus. It was the camp of the saints. But now, as these maps get more modern, suddenly all this land is unknown again. And you can see here, they put the logo of the map in the upper left-hand corner of it. You can see here that it still shows a strait, but now we're not seeing Straits of Anian anymore. We're not seeing Straits of De Vries anymore, and we're not seeing the land of Jesus anymore. And then we go further, and then we begin to see maps that look like this. And this is a peninsula, basically, where Alaska is. And you can see here that it is attached to land in the North Pole. You can see Greenland is attached to where Alaska is through this land in the Arctic. But you can see, again, part of Asia there and North America here, what now looks like a peninsula. So where the land of Jesus was is now there's one strait. It's more peninsula-like, and that land is unknown as to what's there, basically. And here it is again on this map on the left, showing this land is now a peninsula. It says Presque d'Isle of North America. So it is a peninsula like almost to the point that it's an island, but it's connected by a small land bridge to North America, to what we know as North America today, with one strait in between it and Tartary. So something happened, something changed during the late 1700s, in my opinion, for the land of Jesus to suddenly, instead of having two straits, now has one strait that what everybody knew as the land of Jesus at one point in time is now unknown land. You can see here another map here, and you can see California is no longer an island. You can see this large sea there where this peninsula is. And this is called the Sea of the North. This is no longer there, but it was at that point in time. I don't think these cartographers were inaccurate in their mapping. I think that there was something cataclysmic that happened in the late 1700s, or began to occur at this time, possibly through several decades, to change the land at that time in the northwest of what we now know as United States and Canada into Greenland and the Arctic. And you can see here in this part of the map, you can see the Presque Isle of North America. And you can see there's a small strait between it and part of what we now know as Russia. What's also interesting in this map, if you notice the pictorials, you can see what we would refer to as Native Americans, but they have a cross on their land. And you can see several scenes of what looks like battles. You can see here a cross that what looks like these aristocrats or those who were discovering new lands, what they saw. And they saw Native Americans, what we would know as Native Americans, with crosses here and at the border of this land that they came upon. So I find that very interesting. And you can see several of these pictures going all around this map of that. Another one over there in the right-hand side showing a cross. And again, you see, just to show one more example, Presque d'Isle of North America. And you can see it's now not known as the Strait of Anion or the Strait of De Vries, but it has become the Strait of the North. And now you can see Tartary with Siberia there. And you can see the polar Arctic. You can still see Greenland attached to this land. And I find this interesting. We'll see this on our other maps. This word right here in Siberia means campfire. And so I just found that interesting. So now we get to the 1800s, and suddenly we start to see that these maps, even though they show Greenland still attached to North America with the way it's drawn, that all of a sudden in the North Pole, it's just frozen ocean. There's no land there, it's just frozen ocean. Suddenly, all this land has disappeared. The land of Jesus has disappeared from the maps as we get into the 1800s. And you can see what we now know as modern day Alaska, with a small strait between it and Russia. And you can see here the strait, and now it's known as Bering Strait. This is the strait we know of today. And again, just to show a couple other maps, we're in the 1800s now, and suddenly it's just frozen ocean, Arctic ice in the North Pole, uninhabitable land, and what we see today on our maps with Alaska now being directly across from Russia. This is where in the older maps of the 16 going into the 1700s, we saw the land of Jesus. And again, just to show another map showing Greenland connected to land, but then it has ocean too. So it's this very kind of arbitrary way of describing this. And again, a map well into the 1800s now, even into the 1900s, the 20th century, showing in the North Pole kind of this unknown. Is it ocean? Is it land? We see Greenland, and all of a sudden its border kind of just disappears into the ocean, but we don't see it necessarily as an island in these maps. But again, we see the strait, Bering Strait now, between Alaska of the United States and Russia in this 20th century map. So now let's just go into, and that'll be most of the maps. Let's go into the speculative portion of this video. And as we just saw on that map, it never showed Greenland as a quote island. It showed it where its northern border faded into the Arctic Ocean. So it got me thinking about, let's look at Greenland and see where people live. And there's only 56,000 people that live in Greenland, and they live mainly on the coast. And you can see it's mainly on the southwest coast and the southern coast of Greenland. But in the north part, where we saw on these maps where that border just faded into the Arctic Ocean, we see a national park there. And you can't have population on national parks. Anywhere where there's a national park is places where they don't want you to go and discover things. You have to have permission by a government in order to explore those areas, and they'll only let you explore what they want you to see, not what they don't want you to see. But you can see here in the northern border, the only thing that's populating that is a United States space base. And you can see here the U.S. military base supports missile warning and space surveillance under a U.S.-Denmark-Greenland agreement. So what space are they talking about? Are they talking about outer space as they falsely describe today in our world in this little season? Or is it space, the land space of the Arctic region? And you can see here the official symbol of the Space Force that was established by Donald Trump in 2019. And you can see their symbol and what it's pointing to. It's pointing to the north on the fake spinning ball. And just like NASA, which was created in 1958 and 11 years later, they faked a moon landing. It was established for a reason, for a purpose. I think the same will be said of the Space Force. They didn't start a new branch of the Air Force, of the military, in order not to use it for something. And so this area of the Northwest, this Northwest Passage, if you will, was sold by Russia to the United States in 1867, I believe, but in the 19th century for $7.2 million. It was called Seward's Folly because it was described as just wasteland, but we know otherwise now that it has a incredible amount of resources there. But why did the Russian Empire sell this large, vast amount of land to the United States? Well, I think it was to set up an area where few people could go. And that began the Cold War right after World War II of the 20th century between these two. They don't call it the Cold War for nothing. This is talking about land of the North. And the DEW line being established over 3 years right after World War II in the 1950s. During this Cold War era, this was an excuse basically for the United States to build what's called the DEW line, and it's a radar system to warn us of things. It's called distant early warning. That's what DEW line means, of anything that was coming into the Canadian and United States space, basically. And you can see here that this borders on the upper part of Russia. Is that land above it, or is it ocean? And there's Greenland. It's a part of the DEW line, as well as Canada. So basically, this was built in the mid 20th century to surveil the Arctic region. They tell us one thing, but I believe it's for another purpose. The DEW line story. It's their story. And again, as we went back, there's a lot of deception of the North. I don't think it's coincidence that Christmas, that really came to what we know it today fairly recently in the 1800s, in the late 1800s actually, during the Little Season of Deception, that Santa Claus and his elves live at the North Pole. They want to, the land that's there, they want to make it where it becomes mythical in everybody's head. And this leads me to Admiral Byrd. We know Admiral Byrd, he did polar expeditions. He's most known for his Antarctic expeditions. And I think he was part of Operation High Jump, for instance. But he was also in the 1920s part of a North Pole expedition. And Admiral Byrd was also a Freemason, and we talked about that a lot during this season of deception. But this shows the San Francisco Chronicle in May of 1926. Byrd circles North Pole in a plane, 1,620 miles on a nonstop dash. "20 years later, or maybe even 30 years later, before his death, a couple of years before he passed away, he was interviewed in the 1950s about his Antarctic expeditions. And he referred to what was called Little America at that time, referencing Antarctica during this 1950s interview that was broadcast on TV. And what he said was there is left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being, and that's beyond the pole on the other side of the South Pole from Little America. And this shows a map of what, in the land, in the era of deception, what they tell us Antarctica is, how big it is. And this is a debunking flat Earth slide here, but I used it simply to show this quote of Admiral Byrd. And what strikes me here is he had been to the North Pole a couple of decades or so earlier. And so, as Freemasons, as this era of deception often does, they will mix truth into their lies because they want you to know, but at the same time, they don't want you to know. They want to get the scent off of what's true. So I believe that, like Freemasonry teaches and does, he was actually speaking when he was talking about this Antarctic expedition in the 1950s. I think he was actually referring back to what he saw in the 1920s when he explored the North Pole. And that when you look at this quote from that perspective, it begins to make a lot of sense. There is left in the world today an area as big as the United States, again, 3 time zones of land that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole. So what pole are we talking about? And on the other side of Little America. And what we know is the United States today, in some ancient maps, antique old maps, that part was referred to America Minor or Little America. And that the upper part into Canada was more of the larger amount of land of, quote, America. And so just take that for what it's worth. And so again, I think when he was speaking of what everybody thought was Antarctica, he was actually referring to his flight around the North Pole, not the South Pole. And did he see something like this? And you can see here, this is, as we know, a Mercator map of the late 1500s. And you can see here Greenland, and it's attached to land with the magnetic rock in the center, the land with 4 rivers, 7 rivers going towards the Strait of Anian. And you can see here Asia. You can see here America. You can even see California region in this old map of the late 1500s. So I think that possibly this is what the North Pole, if you will, the center of our realm, looked like during the millennial kingdom. And as it got closer to the end of the millennial kingdom and the beginning of the Little Season, there were changes within this landscape where this land actually did come out into what we know now as a 3-hour time period between Alaska and Russia. But that afterwards, I think that once the Little Season began in the late 1700s, early 1800s, that land receded or was changed in a way, possibly from the loosing of Satan from the bottomless pit. And we could speculate about where that may be. Was it in China? Is that why the Great Wall was built there? Is that why Tartary is called Tartary, for those who protected around Tartarus, even? We can speculate about that. But have we come full circle now, full Arctic circle, no pun intended, on the land of Jesus, and now it is back to its early millennial kingdom borders right now, and that this is what they're hiding, this is what they are beginning to surround. And again, like Freemasonry does, Admiral Byrd, he wants to tell you the truth, but he can't. That's why they put the shushes over their mouth and all that. They know that they're in the Little Season. They know the Millennial Kingdom's in our past. Admiral Byrd, I'm sure, probably saw things that he could not tell people. So he tried to tell people in a way where he wouldn't get in trouble. And you can see here, he died shortly after that interview. And you can see his gravestone here. And, you know, it reminds me of Werner von Braun, who was part of NASA and was involved with Walt Disney and rocket making. He was part of the deception that established NASA, and as we know it as space now. But at his death, he put Psalm 19:1 on his gravestone. He made sure that that was there. Because again, they can't tell you the truth, but on his gravestone, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. That was his way, after his passing, of telling us the truth. And I think it's the same way with Admiral Byrd when he was speaking about Little America. And shortly after Admiral Byrd's exploration of the South Pole, the Antarctic Treaty was began. You know, this world can't agree on anything, but every nation signed the Antarctic Treaty in 1959. But again, in this era of deception, we just have to be discerning and see their lies and see the truth through their lies. And if they can make most people in this world today believe that they live on a ball spinning 1,000 miles an hour, then certainly they can hide land and make you believe that in the North Pole on a spinning ball where Santa Claus and his elves live, that there is nothing but frozen ice in the Arctic Ocean. They can certainly do that. And we'll close with Revelation 27 through 9, because this, I believe, is where we are at. We are in the little season, and I think we're close to the end of it. But in Revelation 27 through 9, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And again, just to show an old map from the 1500s looking at the North Pole, this is what they showed back then. And again, another map that are different from the Mercator map, but showing the same thing. And you can see here again what I believe the world actually looked like. This is where Jerusalem was, and probably still is, if not above it, in heavenly Jerusalem. But this is where I think the saints reigned from, and I think they went out throughout the world, spreading the gospel, building infrastructure, all the cathedrals that we see all the way around the world. You can see how from this location they got to Europe with all the European old world architecture, into Russia, Tartary, and all the old world architecture there, as well as the Americas. And now I think after changes in the landscape during the 1700s, that it possibly has gone back to this today, where instead of the land of Jesus between North America and Russia, there's now just one strait. We know it as the Bering Strait. Now they could be hiding through the international date line 3 hours of land, and that is a possibility. I'm not dogmatic on either viewpoint, but speculating, I believe we may be back to where the land is right here in the center of our realm, and this possibly could be where the camp of the saints is right now. This could be where believers went to prior to the end of the millennial kingdom as the little season began. There's many researchers that show that the world's population of almost 8 billion people today could fit into the state of Texas. So we certainly know that a landmass bigger than America on the other side of Little America, as at the pole, on the other side of the pole, as Admiral Byrd stated, that it could be home to a large number of people. And so as the millennial kingdom came to an end, did the word begin to go out, and they knew where they were in the timeline, that they needed to go to where the land of Jesus was. And again, Madeline used this in her video, this verse, enter ye at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat, because strait is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Now this, from a spiritual standpoint, from a standpoint of eternal life, is obviously speaking of Jesus Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He states, no man cometh to the Father but by me. Eternal life is only found through Jesus Christ, and faith and trust in him, through the promise of God of eternal life through Christ. That's what we've put our faith in, for the precious free gift of eternal life. But during the end of the millennial kingdom, when the word of God was being spread, were the saints also using this verse from a more fleshly standpoint? Straight is the gate, and to hit the straits before they closed, to go to the land of Jesus. And again, that is just pure speculation, but it does give an answer to the question, where did the saints go? Where did all the believers go? But you can see in pictures of the early 1800s, there's a lot of deserted cities. And that goes back to mud flood research. But there is evidence of a cataclysmic event in the late 18th century into the early 19th century. And there's a lot of people that are missing. Why is that? Well, maybe they went somewhere where we can't see right now. I don't think we can get to this area right now, but I think it will be revealed. I think that's why we saw so many Arctic expeditions to the North Pole during the 19th and early 20th century. You saw dozens and dozens of Arctic expeditions. I think they were looking for where the land of Jesus is. I think they were looking at where the camp of the saints were. Where did all the people go? Where did all the believers in Christ go? I think on the other side of the millennial kingdom into the little season, I think those that were living outside the camp were looking for the camp. And we see so many explorers during this time looking for the Arctic Grail, the quest for the Northwest Passage. And this shows it from 1818 to 1909. So right there, where Satan's little season probably began, between 1776 and 1816. Right after that, that's when Arctic expeditions began. And now we see a lot of interest in the Arctic. But again, now we see it more from a military aspect. As Russia and China step up Arctic presence, Greenland grows in importance for the United States. I bet it does. I bet that's, we know our Space Force is there, right? And there's no coincidence that the world powers, the three main world powers now, are the United States, Russia or Tartary, and China. We see this in all old maps. They are surrounding the camp. Those are the main three world powers that would have access to the Arctic. And I think that prior to the battle of Gog and Magog that we see in Revelation 20, I think that in order for that battle to begin, that they have to see what they're fighting against. And I think that the next big event will be the revealing of the heavenly city, the beloved city, and the camp. And we see here a picture of the heavenly city. And I think that's why the Northern Lights, we see them where they are. I think this is the throne of God, or actually maybe the foundation of New Jerusalem that we read about with the precious stones of the foundation. I think this may be manifesting as the aurora borealis. And I think that may be where the camp of the saints is. And so I'll close it there. And this has gone on for an hour, but I hope that this built upon Madeline's research. I'll link her video to this, watch them back to back, and I think we can gain a lot of perspective on this topic, and we'll do another video soon. God bless.